Hi everyone, we're back with the 2020 Biz Kickstart event. We are on near the end of our second week. It's been amazing. We had lots and lots of speakers, and we're here with Galen, who's going to talk to us all about how to be our best self, how improving ourselves can make our business better as well. And we're going to dive into different aspects and how we can do it. And Galen's a wealth of knowledge on this regard. So say hey, Galen, and share a bit about how you got started.
Hey, Mike. Yeah, so what I started to notice, not only in my life, but in the lives of the people I worked with, is that while we're very driven and we want to achieve and be successful and we have goals that we want to meet, that sometimes our best intentions come at a cost. And often that cost is our well-being, our energy, our emotional state, our mental state, and our physical state. And we can go through this process of hustling and grinding and really applying a lot of force to get what we want. But it's kind of like buying on credit. And someday that bill is going to come in the mail, and you may be surprised as to how much you have to pay back. And so what I've discovered with myself is that I need to prioritize my well-being if I want to create the impact, influence, and income that I want and help other people achieve their desires and their dreams. And that was the cornerstone of creation. And when my energy became lower, I noticed that my thoughts changed and my actions changed. And, I would default to my bad habits, if you will, and it didn't allow me to show up fully as I wanted to. And I started seeing a lot of people struggling with that as well. Despite that they wanted to get in shape or just look and feel better, that for some reason they were struggling in order to do that. And part of that was just they had all their focus on the work that they do, and there wasn't a lot of focus on themselves. And because of that, no matter what they tried, nothing really seemed to work. And so it's a matter of scaling back and stepping back to create a little more space for ourselves so we can show up more fully in our life and in our business.
One of the things that tends to come up when we start talking about things like this is the idea of people will do more for others generally than they'll do for themselves, right? And this whole internal battle around being selfish and all those things. Is that something that you can speak to? Is that something that you've experienced with yourself?
Yeah. So I think part of the challenge is that there is a negative connotation with being selfish and being self-centered. But I think that if we actually recognize what this truly means is that I'm going to take care of myself and I'm the center of the universe so I can better help people, because we can only give what we have. Mm-hmm. And if we find ourselves in a position of being really fatigued and burnt out and having low energy, our ability to give is less. And so the impact that we can create in the world is going to stem from filling our own bucket first and making sure that we're taking care of ourselves. We set the appropriate boundaries in our business, but also with other people, so that we are the center and so that all this can grow outwards from there. And the second part of that is there's also the emotional currencies exchange, that I only feel good if I make other people feel good. And so we create this condition that we people please, or we put other people ahead of ourselves just so we get that form of validation and acceptance. And so the problem is that we're externalizing how we feel dependent on other people, or whether it's some metrics that we hit. And so we're always chasing that feeling, and it brings out this feeling of neediness. And that takes away from our ability to really show up as who we are.
So is it about like it's almost like and instead of ors, isn't it? It's like we look after ourselves and other people rather than or, because most people think about being selfish as the whole, well, I look after myself and only myself, versus looking after myself and other people as well. And one of the things that tends to happen is you might start ticking a couple of birds with one stone. So when I used to be a personal trainer, it was about, okay, well, if I look after myself and I'm healthier, I can give more energy to my clients when I train them. I can be more energetic. I can put myself out there. I can be shouty if I need to be. I can do all those things if I'm like lethargic and low on energy, or I've not had the chance to eat anything. As you said, it does diminish your ability to really put yourself out there in the best possible way. But people tend to think in like black and white, don't they? They tend to think in, well, I'm selfish, and people have this thing of that stops you from essentially giving. It stops you from doing that. Is it about trying to balance those things, or is it about like the more you look after yourself, you find yourself looking after others like as a result? Like how does the system tend to work?
So I would say that when you're in that space in which your well-being is the corner of your focus, that people become more attracted to you. It creates a sense of magnetism and essence that attract people to want to speak to you, that want to get to know what you're about and what you're doing. And so in that way, you become this lighthouse, if you will, in terms of shining your light, shining your message, so that people are drawn to the work that you do. And if they choose to, be involved in your world as well. And so I think that we have to show up fully for ourselves as ourselves and be able to fully express that. And then we're going to notice that people come into our lives. We have different conversations. We connect with people at a deeper level because they're more present. And so we're organically creating this little mini universe of ours. And so that when we show up fully for ourselves in that respect, unapologetically in this form of self-expression, that it's not so much about I have to take care of other people because I have to do that and I need to take care of other people, but rather you're choosing to be a part of what I'm about.
That makes perfect sense, actually. And if you think about it, this is why, well, it's one of the things that doesn't irritate me, because obviously you don't know what you don't know, right? But it's the actions can look the same, but what goes on inside your head can be different. Because you can be doing things for other people, but it's a healthier conversation with yourself. Rather than trying to people please, you're doing it out of, you've got something to give, so therefore you give it, versus I'm going to try to please this person. But from the outside looking in, the actions can look very similar. You'd be surprised at how similar they can be to some people. If someone's not in the know, if you will, that can look very, very different. If you're in the know, you can sort of tell, like they're never giving more than they can. Where if someone's in that state, as you said, it's almost like being addicted to it, isn't it? Being addicted to trying to please others, you find they're getting more and more and more tired the more they do it. That's just an observation from what I've seen as well, is that if the conversation is the right one, with yourself almost, then it tends to impact not so much the action as such, but what the action means. Is that something that you can speak to as well?
Yeah, I think it goes down to the intent, and that's the most important thing. And more importantly, am I actually experiencing what I want from that intent? And so if you look at it in terms of people pleasing in order to validate my self-worth, then my self-worth is dependent on them validating me. Mm-hmm. And so we rely on this relationship, so that I only feel good if other people validate my actions. And we bankrupt ourselves if we operate from that space. And so part of this process is for us understanding our value and our worth and who we truly are, so that other people's validation and acceptance is not needed. Is it great? Sure, everyone loves it.
Yeah.
But when we become more certain in who we are and we have a deeper understanding of that, we require less neediness for other people to say, you look great, or you're doing a good job. And so we have full understanding of ourselves. And so the more that we can create that and operate through the world, more people will be attracted to us in the work that we do, because we have that certainty, which they feel they want as well. Yeah,
I like that. It's almost like the more you do that, the more you allow other people to do it as well. It's almost a sense, the whole lighthouse thing is quite a powerful concept, isn't it? Because the brighter you shine, you make other people feel bright as well. It's just kind of shine the light on them, makes them feel bright. Trying to word it in the right way. So what tends to happen with that, and this is from my own experience, so when I started to do it, I realized that sort of brought up a sense of the external topped up what I already had. You know, when you mentioned like doing things for validation, right? Like the whole sort of people pleasing thing that I actually used to do. I was a perpetual people pleaser. It was something I did all the time. It was partly because it was the only way I was going to get any sort of feedback was if I fought for it almost. But as I sort of grew as a person and realized that, hey, it doesn't really matter that much as long as I feel good in myself. As long as that happens, it still feels good, as you said. You know, you get the whole sort of feel good factor when people say that you do an amazing job, and we almost can't get out of that because everyone likes to be told they're doing a good job. We just do, don't we? It's just a natural thing. And then there's a whole, well, sometimes it isn't just about that, though, is it? It's not just about positive things. It's not just about, okay, I feel all right, whether you tell me it's great or not. But I found that it also feels okay, even if I get negative feedback. Even if, you know, you get like trolls online or whatever it is, I still have that sense of they're entitled to their opinion. Like whether it's right or wrong, you know, it's theirs. And I still keep doing my thing almost. Is that something that you can shed some light on for people? The whole sense of, well, everyone's going to feel amazing when they get positive feedback, but what about negative feedback?
Yeah. So everyone has the right to think, say, and do as they please, as long as they're not harming someone. Everyone has the right to be, you know, share their own opinions, their own thoughts. And the problem is that if we hold the opinions of others higher than we hold ourselves, again, we become dependent on them determining our life because of their standards or their beliefs or how they see the world. And so we're no longer operating under our own sphere of influence, but rather how others see us. And so we try to shift, you know, people please, or to wear this mask, or to show up in a way that allows us to feel as if we fit in. And so we're essentially changing ourselves to meet other people's expectations, which may be completely incongruent in terms of who we really are. And that creates this internal struggle and disconnect because we can feel like a fraud, or we feel like we're not honoring ourselves and being true to ourselves. And so our ability to actually be seen is diminished because we're not showing who we truly are. And what we all want is this form of authentic human connection. And the more that we wear our masks in order to try to fit in or try to please people, we don't create those true connections that we want because we're not fully expressing who we really are.
Yes, it's almost like it sort of starts with you, doesn't it? It always starts with with you and kind of like expresses itself outwards almost. The lighthouse analogy, again, it sort of stuck with me because a lot of people watching or listening will probably want to figure out how can they shine brighter? What are the things that we can do to help us shine brighter? Because everyone probably shines to a certain extent, but when we just sort of recapping slightly over what we've spoken about, this gives the impression it allows us to shine brighter. When we start to do this, we can shine a lot brighter, a lot further, for a lot longer, and we can speed up the whole process of attracting the right people in, right? The ones that get involved with whatever it is that we're doing. What are the things that you can share with us that can help us shine brighter?
Sure. So I think, well, first thing we have to look at is what's really preventing me from shining my light in the first place. Because we all have it, but there is some belief that we have or some perception around ourselves that prevents us from happening. And one of those things is the fear of judgment. Again, so just the opposite side, we want to please people. At the same time, we're also afraid that they are going to banish us or not agree with us or think that we are not worthy or good enough of their attention. And so when we have this fear of judgment, again, we skew, or we kind of show up kind of in, kind of out in that safe space that is just enough for kind of us to do the work we want to do, but not fully be present and involved with it.
Got it.
And so, you know, one of the things we have to realize is that when we have this fear of judgment moving through the world, that first of all, most people are too worried about themselves to really judge. And if they do, it's totally within their right to do so. Because no matter what, we're always forming opinions of other people, whether it's going to be positive or negative, and that's just who we are. And so if we get too concerned about what other people are thinking about us, we start to spend more time in their heads than in our own. And that creates a real problem, because we're having this conversation. What is this person thinking? What are they saying? How do I look? What if they say no? And so we start to create all these future possibilities ahead of us. Essentially, we create the reality moving forward based off of what we think is going to happen in a negative light. And so I think that we have to create more space for ourselves, and through journaling practices, through meditation practices, through being more present of what's happening, so that we just create this awareness and mindfulness about ourselves again. And we have that connection, because in the world that we live in, we are so focused on the external things that we have to do that there's a big disconnect between what's going on in our minds and our hearts. And we're just focused on the things and the doing.
Got it.
More so than who we are being doing it, which is most important.
Do you find that people do also tend to focus on actions quite a bit as well? Like they focus on the thing that they're supposed to do rather than who they're supposed to be. How do you bridge the gap between the two? How do you find that distinction there?
Yeah, so one of the things is that people want to feel more self-confident in themselves. And our self-confidence is going to be a reflection of the commitments that we keep to ourselves. And so when we're starting off in this process, especially around physical change or just trying to make any change in our life, there's the idea that I'm going to jump right in 100%. I'm going to give it my all. And I've got this great elaborate plan. And I've got these big dreams of the possibility that may bring. But all of a sudden you start and you become so overwhelmed. You're like, I can't do this. There's no way it's going to fit in my life. And then it all falls apart. And what we have to realize is that we can have this bigger goal, this bigger desire, but we have to start small and just simply step our way there instead of trying to take this massive leap. And so when we start to layer certain habits in our life and we start to keep our commitments small that we believe that we can do, and we achieve them, that reinforces the belief that we have that we can actually do this. And so the analogy they use is kind of like Goldilocks and the Three Bears. You've got the porridge that's too hot, so you don't eat it. It's too cold, so you don't eat it. So you have to find the one that's just right. And so when going through this process of change, you have to find what is the right next step for me, that it's not too slow so that I feel kind of like this isn't really working. It's not too fast that I feel overwhelmed, but it's just right for where I'm at in my life. That's allowed me to move closer to the change that I want to see. And so our actions have to be individualized based off of where we're at, our environment, our relationships, our lifestyle, and more personally, what we feel comfortable moving forward in.
That makes perfect sense, actually, because when you think about how fast things go, that's where things like overwhelm creeps in, and being too stressed out and feeling like if you set something too big even, it's like, well, it might not work, I might fail, or I might succeed, or all those things. But then there are people out there that probably respond quite well to, how can I put it? It's almost like the bigger they aim, the bigger they would achieve. It's almost like I think it's a psychology thing where, like, if you always set big goals, you'll get further than if you set small ones, just because of the actions that if you sort of go a big goal, the actions that you take might accomplish the small goal as a result on your way there, if that makes sense. So there's a bit of a, as you said, it has to be individualized, doesn't it? It has to be based on what you think. But what would you say is the reason for that? Some people get really excited about the big goals that they may or may not actually succeed because of who they become when they achieve them. Like, where do you strike the balance with that?
So to use an analogy for weight loss, let's just say you want to lose 50 pounds. That's a great ambitious goal, and your life will probably be radically different if you lose it. But you have to lose the first pound first. And so we take this bigger dream and we just break it down into bite-sized pieces, if you will, so that we can focus on the habits and behaviors that we need in order to make it happen. But if we are just thinking about, I have to lose 50 pounds, I have to lose 50 pounds, there's a pretty big gap there. And what we have to do is think about narrowing that gap so that we can actually cross that bridge, if you will, to make it happen. So always keep the bigger vision in mind, But again, focus on what is it I need to do today in order to make that happen. And that becomes much more manageable, less overwhelming.
So is it almost like you've got the bigger goal, but then raw, because like the image I have is someone going, right, 50 pounds, exercise 4 times a day, don't eat, nothing but water. And you would probably lose 50 pounds like the fastest that you ever could, but that's not very enjoyable either. That sounds like hell to me. So,
Right.
but then there are people out there, they're like, right, well, 50 pounds, who would I need to be in order to get there? Let's just say, what would their day look like? What would their mornings look like? What would their evenings look like? What would their meals actually look like? You know, and not necessarily of the 50 pounds, but, you know, who would the person be if you had lost those 50 pounds? Like what would their meals look like? What would their drinks look like? What would their breakfast look like? And that seems to be, it's a different way of seeing it, isn't it? Because when you mention the big goal of the 50 pounds, some people might think, right, how can I lose that as fast as possible? Because they've not, as you said, they've not broke it down into smaller, manageable sort of stepping stones, if you will. But having said that, there are some people that do manage to, I mean, they're a rarity, right? Some people do manage to maintain quick results. There are people out there that do manage to do it. And that speaks to the whole, like, they might have enjoyed that, because in my experience as well, there are people out there that really, really love hard workouts. They love the restricted diets. They love doing the things that I personally hate. So I think that might come into it as well, at least in my mind, is that people that perform the best, people that enjoy the extremes, if you will, they tend to do a lot better in terms of maintaining it as well. Like the chicken and broccoli, or some people live on pizza these days and still manage to look reasonably okay. So I think there's something to be said for that, isn't there? Where the things that get the quick results, if you like it because it's hard, or you like it because you just happen to like the food or the exercise or the business strategies or whatever it is, you can maintain it. I think it's worth just talking a bit about not just how intense the actions are or how fast the results are, but your ability to maintain it because you discovered that you actually enjoy it.
Yeah. And so I think the most important thing is we have this joy in the journey, because like you said, if I hate this process, I'm only going to put up with it for a certain amount of time until I say, screw this, I'm done with this. And so what I've noticed is that once we start to create a new identity around this, in terms of how we see ourselves, how we live our life, and who the person is that we really want to become, we go through this identity shift and change, that we start to enjoy the process more as well. But there has to be that congruency there, that, the typical, like you said, like go hard, go home, lose the weight really quickly. But if you hate it, what's going to happen once you stop? And if you don't create that new identity around that person, everything just falls right back in the old identity of the old habits, the automatic way of thinking, the way of feeling. And so that's the process of transformation, is creating that new self around this, so that it's integrated into your life. It's not something you do for a short period of time, but this is the way that I live my life now.
That makes perfect sense, because I was talking to AJ, one of our previous guests, and he said that a lot of it is about your identity. Like I exercise quite a bit. I don't smoke because I'm a non-smoker. I identify as a non-smoker. So what do non-smokers do? They don't smoke. I don't drink an awful lot. So it's almost like the identity statements, if you will play a part, not because, or therefore I've got to do X, Y, and Z. When I was talking to AJ about it, it's a natural thing because you link it to who you are as a person, which sort of stems back to what you said of, you need to know who that person is first. You need to know who you are before you start to relate that to your actions, right? And in my experience, when I haven't done that, I feel horrible. I feel terrible. When I do that, as often as possible, I feel great, because I'm living in relation to my identity, which is something that you mentioned there. So I quite like that. What are some of the little things that we can do about that, because as you said, this is the analogy I always like to use are people that lose weight for holidays, you know, and it's like, oh, the holiday causes them to change their identity up until the holiday, right? They go, right, I'm someone that has a six-pack, I have a beach body or whatever it is, therefore I've got to do this, and this. But maybe then they sort of go back to their mean, right? They go back to what their old self was doing because they hated the journey of getting to that point. So yeah, I completely get the whole system of you've got to create the identity shift first before you start to sort of change your actions. Otherwise, you will just go back to the old way of thinking, the old way of being. Is it about the being side? Is it about who are you being? Is that one of the ultimate sort of things that you would give people that were watching?
Absolutely, because everywhere we go, there we are. And no matter what our goals are, it's always a search for this feeling of once I accomplish this or once I lose the weight, I'm going to feel a certain way about myself. But we can start feeling that way about ourselves now. And so we can make these small incremental shifts in terms of our perceptions of self immediately, which actually allow the goal to be accomplished in the first place. And one of the things I always tell my clients is that, you know, when you lose the weight, that is the moment that, just like when you buy a car, it feels great to have it. Like there's a novelty sense. You see the scale go down. It's great. You get that little dopamine kick. But if we only rely ourselves to lose the weight to feel good, we're never going to get there, because feeling good is the road to losing weight in the first place. And so that's why well-being in all areas of our life paved this road forward. But if we look in the mirror and we judge ourselves and we hate the way that we look and we're not good enough and we're disgusted, that type of vibrational energy is going to create the barrier for us to make change. And so once we see ourselves in a different light, then that actually allows our mind and our emotional energy to facilitate the change that we want to see. And so the thing is, like, you can't hate yourself thin. You can't be disgusted with yourself and just loathe who you are and hope to make a long-term change, because your intent around that is not congruent with the way that you ultimately want to feel about yourself. And so we have to change our perception of self. We have to change the words and the thoughts and ultimately our actions around who we are. And that is the fastest and easiest way to do that. And we have to be patient and compassionate with ourselves. And we can accept ourselves and still want to change aspects of ourselves. But ultimately, the words that we say and the things that we think dictate our actions. And if they're not in alignment with who we want to be, our actions won't be as well, and then therefore the results will never come.
Yeah, I completely echo that. I think as well, when you think about the whole feeling good thing, I find as well that, you know, when you mentioned, like, sometimes we've got to accept ourselves, we've got to be happy in our own skin before we can start to really shift things. But the example or the sort of tactic, if you will, that I see quite a bit is goal setting, right? Where some people set goals to purposefully not achieve them, to make themselves feel bad, to keep them in the space that they're in. And that happens a lot, right? That happens in business all the time, happens in like health all the time, all of those things. That's why that's one of the themes of my past was I had a negative relationship with goal setting, not because I set goals that I would fail on purpose, but because I was seeing other people do it. I was seeing other people set goals, not achieve them. Like, we're in January still. People have probably failed their New Year's resolutions already, you know? And it made me think, well, if I can't set goals properly, it's almost better to not set them than to set them that you'll fail on purpose, or you were never going to achieve them anyway, and you end up staying in that bad state, that so-called, you know, you just hate yourself sort of state, whether it's because you didn't achieve the goal or just your natural state of not liking yourself, right? The whole sort of, you almost keep the cycle going by setting goals. You almost stay in that state of loathing yourself to a certain degree, and you stay there by setting goals. So one of the things that I used to say to people a while back was, don't set goals and you'll feel great. You'd be surprised at how happy you'll feel if you didn't set too high expectations for yourself. You know, the whole sort of bit of a funny quote from Tim Ferriss, where he said the key to happiness is having low expectations. But I reckon that's also a part of. It's good to accept it and feel good about yourself and not having any expectations of yourself, like internally. But most people that don't set goals very rarely actually achieve big goals unless they really want to achieve them. You know, sometimes you need to have the vision first. You need to, if you sit there and go, well, I won't set any goals this year because I'll feel better about myself, then you don't really move the needle in any way, shape, or form that year. It could be because you've not set any goals, right? So it's a weird paradox, isn't it? Of we stay in a negative state by doing certain things, whether it's goal setting, whether it's, you know, constantly setting goals that we're never ever going to achieve, or setting too high expectations for ourselves for, I don't know, how long our to-do list is, right? 50 things, yes, great. But if we only do 20, like, I'm always going to feel awful, right? Because we have that natural comparison, I suppose. But what tends to come up is the whole do what makes you feel good first. But then, is that something that we should stay with? Because the amount of things that I do now, for instance, I used to hate doing. I hated being on camera, I didn't like the sound of my own voice. I hated the whole situation, right? So I didn't do it. I stayed away from it because I've got to feel good. Right? I don't like doing something that I feel awful. So, but now I'm okay with it. Like, it doesn't, sometimes it actually jazzes me up after I've done something that I used to be fearful of or I used to hate doing. So where do you say to people, okay, sometimes you're gonna not feel so great in the beginning, but eventually you'll improve. Maybe the fact that you overcome that thing is exactly what you need to feel good sometimes. You know, like, you didn't think you were going to do it, you didn't enjoy it, but you did it. Yes, the whole dopamine sort of the rush that you need just to kick things off. But that could, to some people watching or listening, fly in the face of, you've got to feel good first. Because it's something that people will shy away from, right? People will hear what we're talking about right now and go, oh, I've only got to do things that I feel good about. At least half the things that I do now, I didn't used to feel good about like 6 months ago, 12 months ago, but now I do. So where do you like, you go from say, okay, feel good, feel great, it's amazing, because that's what you need to kick things off, or say to people, look, it's not going to be amazing, but you feel good, like, eventually.
Okay, yeah. And a perfect analogy is that typically you feel better leaving the gym when you come in. And like, you're not always like want to do your workout, you're not always going to want to do the process, but at the end of it, you feel a lot better. But that being said, what we can influence is our things that we feel and ultimately things that we think. And so when we go into the scenario such as public speaking, but the night before we stayed up too late and we were out drinking with our friends, we've been eating like shit, not taking care of ourselves, that state of stress and overwhelm is going to create the reality for what's going to happen next for ourselves. And so once we take care of our mental, emotional, physical, spiritual well-being, and we get to the capacity in which we're feeling truly good, and we imagine and visualize ourselves in this process, nailing this on-camera interview, nailing this podcast, whatever it is, and we're in alignment with that, then the resistance around it is so much less. And so you might think, this is going to be uncomfortable for me, but you don't have this immense state of fear or threat that's bringing this negative energy into it. And so we have to optimize ourselves first so that we can actually expand the comfort bubble. But if we're not, the bubble is going to stay really tight because we're always trying to put out fires. We're always trying to crush our to-do lists. We're always just barely keeping our head above water. And so once we take care of ourselves, then all of a sudden this bubble just gets bigger, 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 and bigger, and things get easier, and we get more comfortable, and we start thinking of the positive aspects rather than the negative, and so become more motivated and determined instead of discouraged and frustrated. And so it's not just about joking and saying, yeah, I feel good, so I'm not going to do anything. It's like, I feel pretty fucking good. I think I want to do something. And so that's where the mindset shift is so important, that you're looking for more possibilities rather than just being in a negative state in which we close doors that are open for us.
One of the things that a lot of people might find as well is just how much stress we can handle when we do feel good. So it's the whole kind of like, we feel great, okay, I've never spoke on stage before, but I feel pretty good. I reckon I can handle the pressure of being on stage, right? Yep. The whole sort of, it is a placebo effect, I'm aware of that, but it's a powerful thing, right? Where it's something that we feel great, so we can handle more stress, more pressure, more overwhelm. We can handle more when we're in a good space. I reckon that's the same like physically as well. Like if you're stronger, if you train yourself, build your body a little bit, you know, have that sense of physical strength as well, you feel better in yourself just because you do naturally feel stronger, right?
Yep.
Getting through your day is easy and it's not tiring. Therefore, we feel great. And that's just a purely physical sort of example, right? But it's the same with people that, like, how can I put it? They don't get to that space because of what they're doing.
Right.
Whether they've got the long to-do list, whether they're not looking after themselves. As you said, they go out over the week or the night before their big tour, right? Or their whatever it is, because it's almost like they don't want to feel good. Is that something that you've experienced where maybe you've got clients that you start to go down this path, right, of feeling good, taking action, getting the ball rolling, feeling really good, and then the negativity around feeling good starts to come up, and then the whole self-judgment, as you said before, starts to come up as well? How do you suggest people cope with the self-judgment element when people start making progress with this?
Yeah. So I think one thing we have to consider is that stress addiction is real. And there's a big adrenaline response that comes out of being overwhelmed and stressed, and it keeps us going. And it also can fuel a belief or story about ourselves that if I'm struggling, that's a badge of honor. If I'm suffering and I'm exhausted, that's how I prove my worth and my value to the world. And so there is an identity around chronically being stressed and needing to be burning the candle at both ends, because it makes me a hard worker, and that's great. And at the same time, it's that adrenaline rush that fills the ego and the identity over and over again. So we're stuck in this loop that, you know, this belief that if I'm not suffering or struggling, I'm not working hard, or I'm not doing things I need to be doing, which I think is complete bullshit. But that's a valid choice, sure. And part of it too is once we start feeling good, that may be an unknown feeling for many people. And it's like, well, now what do? I must be doing something wrong because I'm not stressed. I'm not so overwhelmed. I'm not anxious. I don't have this massive list of things to do. And so we start to get challenged because our worldview is starting to shift a little bit. And so making that leap, it seems strange because we always want to feel good, but once we're there, it's like, oh, this isn't right. And so that's where the self-sabotage, you know, kicks in, right? You see people who are successful in their business, and then for whatever reason, they do something to break it back down a notch, or we lose 10 pounds, and all of a sudden we start to see results, but we start doing things that prevent us from losing more weight. And so we really have to identify what's actually going on behind the scenes here. What are some things that are actually influencing me to make this decision subconsciously? It's not necessarily consciously, that prevent me from really seeing the results that I want, or the success, or the feeling, the relationship, the income, whatever it is, and what's really driving this in the behind the scenes.
It's interesting that you bring up the whole behind the scenes thing, because like when it boils down to it, if you're with the right people as well, like the right environment, you're around the right people, like a group of athletes, a group of complete outliers, they're made to feel normal because they're around athletes, right? Like the whole 4 a.m. runs feels weird when you're around no one else that does that. So it's going to be awkward. It's going to be tough when you start getting results and you realize, hang on, I'm the only one doing this. Like what? And then the pressure starts to build and people start to take notice and all those things. You wonder if it's worth doing. And then it's weird, right? Like you're in that environment of you're the only person that does it. But if you're around athletes and they all go out for that run, whether you run together or not, because you're all on the same path, you're all on the same journey, like it becomes normal, right? Like it feels normal. So when I started speaking, I started doing podcasts, I started putting myself out there. I was like, oh my God, I was the only one in my town or in my city that does this. And then because I don't go out or I don't socialize because I'm busy looking at events or I'm busy like seeing what other podcasts I could be guests on or people that I can have guests on my show. And it's like, hang on, this feels weird. This feels too different from everyone that I'm around, right? I mean, I'm not a big drinker anyway, but it was like, I don't like go out just for coffees as much anymore. You know, it's kind of like, I hope we can talk about more than the weather, you know, like just sit there and go, hey, how's life? Okay, I've had this conversation 10 times in the past 3 months. So I think that when you do realize that how different you start to become and you do start to question it, what worked for me was finding like-minded people. You've got to shift what normal is. Otherwise, it doesn't work. You know, when I used to play basketball for my university, and it was great because we all trained together, we all worked out together, we all did the 5 a.m. runs together, we all played together, ate together, went out together sometimes when I felt up to socializing. And it just made everything easier because I wasn't the only person doing it, and then normal, and it felt more comfortable, because it was normal, other people were doing it. This is why gyms work, isn't it? This is why like fitness classes work. This is why masterminds work really well. This is why just having a friend online or offline can make a massive difference when you start pushing the envelope. At least that's what worked for me. You know, when I started, I was like, oh my God, I'm probably the only person ever that, you know, in my town where I used to live that was doing this kind of thing. And it was like, oh, why? And you start having the conversations with your friends, like, why aren't you doing this? Oh, you want to come into that? And you feel, I'm trying to think of the right word. You feel alienated almost because what you want to do is different from what everybody else wants to do. And there's a real sense of separation there. Now, there is an evolutionary reason for that, and I get that. But it becomes a very practical thing. It's not just about like a theory thing, is it? It becomes a very practical thing where it's like, look, if you're the only person doing this thing and it's going to get hard, no matter which way you slice it, there are going to be difficult times for it. Like, it's nice to not be alone sometimes, to be the only person doing it. Is that something that you suggest people do as well? Like once you start realizing, okay, this is tough now, I realize I'm sort of separating a little bit from the norm almost, to what used to be normal for me. Would you suggest people find others where whether it's the paths that are aligned or like what your day looks like or what your week looks like is similar to somebody else because you can have the same conversations? But how far does the social side fit into this?
Yeah. So not just social in terms of friends, but your spouse as well. I think that's a really important thing because you have someone trying to make a change in a relationship, you are threatening the dynamics of that relationship. And that becomes challenging. And then if you have friends that you go out with every weekend and you're going out to dinners and drinking and having a good time, and also you say, I'm not going to do this anymore, that's a threat to the relationship and the social hierarchy of your little tribe, your little community. And so as you speak to evolutionary concept, what humans need most is that sense of belonging, that sense of acceptance within our spouse and as well as our other, work social circle or with our friends. And so one of the hardest things it is for people to do is to not necessarily break off from that, but engage in those activities and set boundaries in terms of what it is that you're going to commit to and what is it that you're not going to commit to. And the quote says you are a reflection of the 5 closest people to you. And if you start, life as most people live it is very common, but it's not normal. Being very overweight and stressed out is not normal. And so we've normalized a very unhealthy, a very suffering type of mentality as a result of our culture. And I can speak more to that, but I'm going to keep it as is. And so once we start doing things differently, it's like, what are you doing? people start asking questions, people start giving jabs, people start just interacting in a way because they don't feel comfortable with you making a positive change in your life. And it's like the crab bucket. The one crab tries to escape, everyone else tries to bring them down. Yeah. And that's where that power of the individuality really comes in as well. And it's like, it can be very helpful for us to ask ourselves, if I keep going down this road 5-10 years from now, where am I going to be? And is that really where I want to be? If I keep this up in terms of the way that I look, in terms of the way that I feel, is if I keep operating the way that I'm in a business right now, is this really what I had planned and I dreamed of when I started my business, to be in this state? Or did I want more freedom? Did I want to be able to enjoy my life? And so having that sense of community and reaching out with people who, like you said, share that, so that we do have a sense of connection, but in a different way. And it goes back to the identity and changing the identity. And that can be a scary thing, because often we are stepping into the unknown. Your first podcast, your first live speaking event is kind of the unknown. But going back to having certainty and creating certainty in yourself and who you are, that creates the armor in the realm of the unknown. And so that's why we can't really do this without that sense of internal knowing, because we become more susceptible to the threats of the outside world.
That's a good point as well, where like we almost become bulletproof, don't we? The whole, like, the more we know ourselves, I suppose the easier it is to handle all this as well, because we don't know who you are, you don't really know how to behave, you don't know how to think, you don't know how to do any of those things. And I put a post out the other day of, if we don't know who you are, we try to find ourselves in others, right? Like we try to, I was like, oh, maybe they know who I am, or oh, maybe they know who I am, right? And we start to we do tend to project a lot, I think, as well. Like, we don't know who we are, then we assume that nobody knows who we are. Like, no one can know who I am, right? The whole and it's like, hang on, is it that, or is it because you don't know who you are? And it's a weird feeling as well, where like it's almost like where, because things stop being as important as well. I don't know if you could sort of shed some light on it, where things that used to be important, or we thought were important at the time, when we go down this road of self-awareness and self-knowledge and all those things, that can start to fade away quite quickly. The things that we thought were important, they're not actually important. But then how do we then start to shift ourselves towards finding out what's important? Because you've gone down the road of self-awareness, you've gone down the road of knowing who we are, we've gone down the road of trying to change our identity and all those things. But how do we figure out then what our sort of guiding light is, what our priorities are, what our values are, what things are important to us? Because if you start to, I'm trying to think of the right phrase, if you start to lose yourself or your old self in the process of trying to find your new self, some people will struggle because they've got nothing to hold on to. But they'll struggle because they've got no sense of like safety almost, and they'll pull back to who they used to be, because it's a lot safer or a lot easier than trying to go forwards without having something to hold on to.
Sure. Yeah, an analogy that's, I think, pretty applicable here. It's like you're trying to go across the monkey bars, and to traverse, you have to let go of one and then swing to the next. Yes. And in this process of change or transformation, we're always kind of like swinging back and forth between the same ones, because we're scared of losing part of our identity. We're in the gap between the two. And as we evolve, our values will change. What was once really important to us may not be so important to us now. But I think it's important to remember that we get to create who we are. It's not so much a process of self-discovery as it is self-creation. And so every day we go through this process of first be really clear, what are my values? What really is important to me? And then how will I show up in the world demonstrating these values? And like you said, in your early experience, it's like, I didn't know that I would like speaking so much until I did it. And all of a sudden, this is something that's of value to me. This gives me energy. This gives me life. This gives me a way to express myself. And so, part of it is jumping and building a plane on the way down. And being recognizing that often what we're fearful of never really comes to fruition. Anxiety doesn't really mean that what we think is going to happen is going to happen, and we just have to jump to some extent. But that being said, back to being taking care of ourselves, that's kind of our model airplane in our backpack we have to pull out and make. And so expanding the safety bubble so we feel safe is critically important, because we can't change when we don't feel safe, because our brain will always tell us, don't do that, just you keep doing what you're doing because you're staying alive. And so we can change that level of safety based off how well we take care of ourselves, so that we feel better, we feel safe, so we can expand and do some of the things that we want to do that we really feel that would add increase to our life.
Is it a real sense of like the safer we feel currently might, I'm trying to think of the right way of putting it, because you mentioned that we stay as we are because we feel safe, but yet the safety or the certainty is what we need in order to grow as well. Mm-hmm. So what, strange question now, but what's the difference?
So we are still animals, and so our biological need is to procreate and stay alive. And as we've evolved, our human brains have decided we're going to do that, and you want to have dreams and visions that you want to see fulfilled. And so we're still operating from this three brain standpoint, the basic survival to needing social connections, and then our human brain that it comes down to making $200,000 a month, having a six-pack abs, or fitting in a bikini on the beach. And so we're always moving through these three areas of our brain. And when we don't have safety, we don't have access to this part of our brain that allows us to make these things happen. Much like if you don't have food or shelter or water, you're not too worried about running a marathon. And so we're always operating at our basic level of what we have inside of our heads and our hearts. And when we don't have these things, we don't have social connections, when we don't have our basic needs for survival, if we don't have this feeling around who we are, it's really hard to make anything else happen. And so we stay stuck in survival mode, never really make it to the state of thriving.
Is that something that like we've got to, it's almost like, is it Maslow's hierarchy of needs or something, where our sort of priorities shift once you've got some of our boxes ticked? You know, if we've got our survival needs met, our brain goes, okay, what's next?
Yep.
We've got social connections, like, okay, what's next?
Yep.
You know, the amount of, some people forget that though, don't they? Like they don't realize that, you know, you've got to have an element of stability or safety around certain aspects before you can think about building space rockets or whatever it is. You know, the whole sort of, you can only go so far when you said you feel unsafe, right? You feel unstable to a certain degree. But I guess that also works on the identity front as well, doesn't it? You've got the needs met and all those things, but then how does the safety play a part in, we can feel safe enough in who we are, but we don't want to lose that. But then at the same time, you need that to a certain extent in order to feel like you can progress. So is there a different type of safety with that? Is there a different version, if you will, that, you know, some people watching might be thinking, okay, I get where he's coming from, but the safety thing I might like more than progressing, more than growing. So where do you sort of draw the line between a version of that, version of being safe that we want to keep and we don't want to let go of, versus the safety that allows us to push on?
I think we have to ask ourselves, what is it that I really want? And I think we have a lack of clarity of what that is. We think we know what we want, but that's necessarily always the case. Just like we want to lose 30 pounds, but that's not really what we want. And so I think the confusion around that creates the barrier as well. And so we have to be fluid in terms of our identity as well. I don't think we can't put ourselves into a box. It's an ever evolving thing. We're never the same person 2 days in a row. That's always changing and evolving. So I think it's important to have understanding around who we are and creating who we are, but we can't fit ourselves in this tiny box of this person does this, 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 and this, and this. And as soon as I challenge that, the identity completely falls apart, because it's always being shifted and changed day in and day out. And I think we have to look at, you know, in terms of how I'm seeing myself, how I'm moving through the world, is this allowing me to achieve what I want based off of my intent? And so let's just say that you're running a business and you're spending a lot of hours, and the only way that you know how to manage your stress is to eat a whole bunch of junk food and drink a whole bunch of alcohol. And that's your release. That's your thing. And part of the challenge you may have may be that if I stop doing that and I start, applying these different concepts to my life, then it means that I just lack discipline, or I just have to use more force. I just have to be, I just have to stop doing that. And instead of recognizing that maybe the way that I see myself isn't really working out the way that I want it to. And if I keep doing the things that I'm doing, it's never going to allow me to get there. And so we're challenging the ego, and the ego is very fragile, especially in men. And so we don't want to recognize that. We just want to apply this. Everything is, only tool we have is a hammer. So we have to everything as a nail. Okay. And so part of the identity is shifting. Like maybe who I really thought that I am isn't really the person that I need to be in order to get what I want.
That can be a negative thing for a lot of people, can't it? The whole sort of, I am who I am, right? That's a starting point. Sure. But that's not the person that's going to get me to what I want. Right. And I guess, as you mentioned, it is a confusing thing, because then it's like, well, do I really want what I think I want? And is it worth changing my identity for and going through the whole process that we've sort of talked about over the past 45 minutes to an hour? It becomes quite clear that I almost think that people need to do it without fully knowing. As you mentioned, it's a self-creation thing. I think you've got to discover it to a certain extent, almost. That you've got to, if you don't want that, okay, go on to that. It's almost like that's what life tends to be. It's a constant state of trying to figure out what we really want, because in my own experience, the path of going to something that we think I want, find something else comes along, oh, okay, I'll go in that direction or this direction. But if I hadn't started initially with that, what do I think I want, I would never have found the next thing or the next thing. Which then comes back to, well, if we never really get there, one of the beliefs some people might have is we never really make it. There's no top of the mountain, because you'll get to the top of the mountain and you realize it's a stepping stone, right? You realize there's that next thing. And I think that getting back to one of the things that you said before is you've got to enjoy the journey, because the chances of you getting to a destination is so slim anyway. Like I've not got the end yet. I don't think I ever will, which is fine, because I'm enjoying the journey. Sometimes I enjoy the failures, which is a weird sensation, let me tell you. But it's one of those things where, like, if you keep going and you fight it and you push through it and you go, eventually I'll get to the end. And you think, well, I've got to the end, and well, look at that. I reckon I can go and achieve that. I reckon I can do that. That'd be pretty cool if I did that. But you wouldn't have got to that point if you hadn't started. I get that. It's the whole sort of, you've got to get the ball rolling before you can figure out which direction to roll it in, sometimes. It's a weird sensation, because it seems like you're pulling from loads of different directions. Like we need to figure out what we want. Otherwise, the journey becomes hollow, right? And there's no feeling, there's no celebration, there's no sensations around it at all. And it's all very, like, misguided almost. But then if you can waste a lot of time trying to figure out what it is that you want, and you still might not really have figured it out. You still might not have really got clear on it, but you've not really taken any actions either. Right.
So we get stuck in this phase of mental masturbation, endlessly thinking about our goals, endlessly thinking about the future. And so we end up just living this entire fantasy in our head, which is, cool if you want to do that, but nothing actually changes. And I think that's a big thing, is it's like overthinking, overanalyzing, waiting for the perfect moment, waiting for life to settle down when things are a little bit less crazy. And the future stays exactly the same. And so our present reality is our best indicator of what the future may hold. And at some point, it's like, what is the next best thing I can do for myself here? What is the next choice that I can make that allow me just to feel a little bit better. Because part of this awareness as well is that when you start feeling better, you start operating at a higher level, possibilities, like you said, these roads and avenues open up for you. And when you're operating at a higher level, you meet different people and introduce you to different people and different possibilities, different avenues and roads. It's part about keeping this whole human experience open and available to us, and not staying small and closed down, not receptive to being able to give or to receive. And so this is more about yourself opening up and moving through the world and being seen and being judged and being vulnerable and being raw, just so you can have the full-fledged human experience. And you can decide which direction, which road you want to go down. But I think it's important to remember that we have options, we have choices that we can make. And as soon as we condemn ourselves to, this is who I am, this is the way this is the way life is, then all those doors get closed. And that's when we really feel stuck and in the shit and not having the life experience that we ultimately want.
So as a final question for you, Galen, we've covered an absolute ton. And I think my head's going to slowly explode once I stop the video. But off the back of, not wanting people to be stuck in this state of, I've got to figure out who I am first before I do anything, and I've got to do this, and I've got to do that, and you become literally just a guy with a lot of notebooks and a lot of journals, but not really doing an awful lot. How can you not like tell people what to think, but if people want to make decisions, how can you help people with that? Because a lot of people can struggle with not enough choices. Some people can struggle with too many choices. And I think most people struggle with too many choices in this day and age, with technology, the internet, the people doing a lot with not a lot makes you think, oh, I can do that as well. But there's millions of people doing that, and people tend to think, well, where do I start? What do I do? What's the thing that I need to do? Because we've established that, sometimes you've just got to act. Sometimes it's the action and getting yourself going that yields to the doors being open. You realize that they're closed until you move quick enough that they open all by themselves. You don't have to open them. They just open all by themselves because you're moving towards it. Mm-hmm. And people can be like, okay, well, where do I go? Like, what sort of questions do I need to be able to answer, to whether it's reducing the amount of options, whether it's making sure I get rid of the ones that I don't really want to do, or it's a nice to have, but I'm not really that bothered. Like, what sort of questions can you ask people or ask yourself to make the decision making that little bit easier?
Okay. So we can go down a whole different avenues with this, but I'm going to try to keep it clear and succinct. And I think the most important thing we ask ourselves is, how do I want to feel? And when we're in the state of being burnt out or tired or overwhelmed or stressed out, how do I want to feel instead? Is it going to be more energized? Is it going to be more calm? Is it going to be more relaxed? Then, okay, what are some tools that I can use? And that's where the process of meditation becomes so important. That's in the process of going through a visualization process that allows you to create the future that you want for yourself is important. That's why going outside and exercising is so important. So we get to create this feeling that we want on a daily basis. If I want to feel really good, I'm not going to slam a fifth of vodka. I may do that every now and then, but that's not going to be my current state.
Yeah.
And if I'm feeling really overwhelmed, but I want to feel more clear, okay, then what do I have to do? I probably have to cut down my list of things to do to only 2 today. If I'm feeling really exhausted, I want to feel more energized, I probably shouldn't go to that party tonight. I should probably just stay in instead. And so we get to create this feeling that we want. And we have the choices and we have strategies in order to do so. But we can't keep doing the same things over and over again and expecting us to feel better and to make a change. We have to look at this from a 30,000-foot view. What's happening in my life right now that's causing me to feel the way that I don't want to, and how can I address it and make these shifts? And then once our energy comes back, our essence comes back, our vibrance and mentality comes back, then we can start doing different things that are more in alignment with our goals. But we got to put out the fire first before we can start reconstructing the building.
That's a very good point, actually, because just before we sort of finish, it's almost like you take care of how you want to feel, but that might only last a day, and you can get right back to it again. You can get, there's the whole sort of Because just going off what you said there, it's like, so I can go with the feeling and then feel okay, and then I can go, right, what's the goals that I want to achieve? And it's an interesting point that, it doesn't have to stay that way. You don't have to go with the feeling constantly, because, as you say, you can stay that way, which is great, but then it's a very difficult life to live if you're questioning yourself every single turn. It's a weird sense of, okay, you can deal with the fighter. Once that's gone, then you can go, right, well, what do I want to achieve? What would fulfill me? What would make a life well lived, almost, if you will? But you can't do that, sort of summarizing the whole thing now, is you can't do that without looking after yourself. You can't achieve the best things that you want to achieve if you're not looking after the fact that you're burnt out, you can't think properly, you're not getting a lot of sleep. So you've got to ask yourself, like, am I the person that can achieve that thing right now? No. Okay, how would that person feel? How do I want to feel? And you sort of go about it in that way. I like the whole sense of, look, you might only have to do this for a couple of days, and you can get right back on that wagon again, and you can start knocking walls down and achieving things that you want to achieve. But if you can't do that right now, you've got to get the barrier out of the way first. Otherwise, it doesn't work.
Right. And that's why the structure of our day is so important, because the results that we experience are going to be how we live our life. And if we want different results, we have to live our life differently. And once we have this foundation, once we have this identity, we have this value and belief system, then it keeps going and going and going and going, instead of the start, stop, start, stop, start, stop. It all has to be created first, and it starts with ourselves first.
Definitely. Well, it's been great to chat to you. We've not had a conversation like this for a long time, and it's amazing to see how we're both quite aligned as well. It's been pretty cool. So where can people learn more about you? How can people get in touch?
Yeah, so I'll be on Facebook as Galen Lundin, and you can also check out endtheweightbattle.com. It goes into some of these deeper concepts around prioritizing yourself in your life so that you can finally lose weight and feel good, but most importantly, live the life that you want as a result of that.
Awesome stuff. Well, it's been great to chat, as I said. Looking forward to watching the replay. We don't have anyone joining us live, so there'll be no questions. If you have any questions for Galen, then feel free to contact him using the links that are in the notes for the event. All right, so if you're watching the replay, you would have notes along with this and links and things. So have any questions for Galen, feel free to check them out. It's been great to chat, and I look forward to keeping in touch.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it.